Organizations like the American Association of Retired Persons, commonly known as AARP, were in theory designed to look out for the best interests of elderly Americans and protect them against predatory schemes in this country, of which there are many. In reality, though, the AARP is aiding and abetting the privatization of Medicare, and most people are completely in the dark about it. So this piece was written in Jacobin, and I think it's an excellent piece. I hope that people become increasingly privy to what's going on, but it has to do with Medicare Advantage, okay? Medicare Advantage is basically something that was put in place in January of 1999. And it is a private alternative to Medicare. And it was designed to work like this. So if private insurers with Medicare Advantage are able to provide care at a lower cost than what the federal government pays them, then they get to keep some of that federal money as profit, which, I mean, that is insane. It is insane that it works that way, okay? Thereby incentivizing these insurers to keep their costs down, okay? At least that's what the lawmakers claimed the program was supposed to do. But let's see what actually happened, okay? In the years since the creation of Medicare Advantage, providers have repeatedly told medical professionals to exaggerate the severity of their patients' medical conditions, thereby allowing these insurers to collect more federal money, meaning our taxpayer money. So let's just call it what it is. They're committing fraud. They're committing fraud to rip off the government of our taxpayer money. That's what's happening, okay. So let's take a quick look at this chart, which I think is very helpful in helping us determine which of these private insurers that have the Medicare Advantage program are, like which ones are actually engaged in some pretty questionable activity. So with United Health Group, they were accused of fraud by a whistleblower. They were also accused of fraud by the US government, and they also overbilled according to the Inspector General. With Humana, they were accused of fraud by a whistleblower. They were also accused of overbilling according to the General Inspector. So all of these groups, with the exception of Centene, which I've never heard of in my life, have at least one violation, but United Health Group has all three, okay? Now, that blatant fraud has huge consequences for us, the taxpayer, okay? The additional diagnoses led to $12 billion in overpayments in 2020, according to an estimate from the group that advises Medicare on payment policies, which is enough to cover hearing and vision care for every American over 65. Another estimate from a former top government health official suggested the overpayments in 2020 were actually double that, more than $25 billion. Regulators at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they're supposed to kind of serve as like a watchdog group that cracks down on this fraud, but they haven't, which is really interesting. Apparently, Congress gave the agency the power to reduce the insurer's rates in response to evidence of systematic overbilling, systematic overbilling. But CMS, that's Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, has never chosen to do so. A regulation proposed in the Trump administration to force the plans to refund the government for more of the incorrect payments has not been finalized 4 years later. Several top officials have swapped jobs between the industry and the agency. So the revolving door is happening. The industry meaning the private insurance companies. That's corrupt and should not be allowed, but it is. And as a result, this so-called watchdog group is not doing any of the watchdogging at all. So John, I'm gonna get to how AARP is involved in just a moment, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on what we've learned so far.
Well, first of all, I've learned that watchdogging used in that way is hilarious. I've never heard the word used in that fashion. I think that we really need to normalize it. But anyway, So first of all, I'm glad that you were talking about this story. Outside of this show, I had not heard anything about this, and it's not really difficult to figure out why. Basically, every aspect of this story is something that the media would either be disincentivized to actively talk about. And there I'm talking mostly about like the way that a lobby is functioning, how it might be changing. That's not the sort of topic that they're generally gonna dive into. It's also about generally the concerns of much older people, draws less attention. It's easy for people to be bored by a story like this, but it is obviously important because they do represent a lot of people. And this, it's a massively important organization, has been for a long time. This really cuts to one of what should be the core policy-based concerns, or certainly it would be of the most interest to the people that this lobby represents. And it's also easy to imagine that people who might even be active participants might not know that this sort of shift is happening in terms of the position that AARP is taking on this. We've seen this in some other areas. I mean, there can be huge lobbies like the NRA that in one era represent a certain sort of thing, and then gradually leadership changes and financial incentives changing can represent a totally different thing. But the membership doesn't necessarily get that. They're not necessarily following what the leadership of the organization is doing. I'm glad that you're pointing out the fraud. My worry would be that, again, because of how big an organization this is, that there might be less incentive for legislators to actually take it seriously, to get involved. Like that's mainly my fear.
John, it's not just that. I mean, sure, that might have some impact on why Congress is refusing to act on this. I mean, they're stealing from the federal government. That's what's happening. It's fraud. Authorities pat themselves on the back anytime they bust a Medicare fraud ring. But the private insurers are engaging in fraud, and it's widespread and it's well known. But they're not doing a damn thing about it. In 2019, for instance, 70% of the House and Senate signed a letter just to show their support for Medicare Advantage, which again is the privatized option for Medicare, okay? And I should also note that, look, I don't think they're doing anything about it, because why would they? I mean, the reason why you see widespread support for this privatized Medicare model, and that of course includes Democrats, is because they're controlled by the same corporate interest, by the same healthcare lobby. So Democrats and Republicans are gonna keep providing cover for these insurers who are defrauding the American people and stealing our resources. That is what they're doing. I also want to just quickly note that in 2019, the same year where 70% of Congress members signed that letter to show support for Medicare Advantage, the Inspector General's office reviewed 430 instances of Medicare Advantage denying care to patients and found that 13% of those requests should have been approved. Now, 13% doesn't sound that bad, right? But then you kind of break it down numbers wise, based on its finding that about 13% of the requests denied should have been covered under Medicare. The investigators estimated as many as 85,000 beneficiary requests for prior authorization of medical care were potentially improperly denied in 2019 alone, in 1 year. And thanks to this very manipulative, the manipulative marketing tactics involved with promoting Medicare Advantage, a growing number of Medicare beneficiaries are enrolled in this privatized model. This graph will show you how, okay? So at the top of this graph, you see traditional Medicare. At the bottom, you see Medicare Advantage. And the number of people who have decided to enroll in Medicare Advantage has increased significantly, more than 50% at this point. I'm not at this point. By 2032, it'll be more than 50%. In fact, by 2024, it'll be more than 50% of retirees, enrolled in this privatized model. And being enrolled in that privatized model means that they will have certain medical needs denied because the insurance companies won't authorize them. It means that these insurers will continue to defraud us and steal our money. And it means that it will slowly and surely gut the traditional Medicare model, which is incredibly important to maintain and protect because of what it does in providing healthcare to elderly individuals who are no longer working in this country because they're retired. So final thing I'll say, John, then I'll go to you, is how the hell is AARP involved? Like, why are they pushing for Medicare Advantage? AARP has been reaping the financial benefits of its own Medicare Advantage plan, which it has been offering in partnership with the for-profit insurance giant United Healthcare since 2003. You guys remember United Healthcare, right?
Hey, wait, weren't they the one with the?
All three. Let's bring that graph back up. Let's bring it back up. Let's take a look at that graph. Because the one prior to that shows all of the violations. Yeah, so you have the Inspector General. So United Healthcare is the first on the list, and it's one of two private insurers that had a 3 violation streak. All 3 violations they were guilty of. Overcharging the government, fraud according to whistleblowers. And I forget what the middle one is, and I can't read that because the screen is too small. But you get what I'm saying. They're the ones who have
claims of fraud.
That's right. They defraud the government with their false claims regarding their patients' needs. So this is what we're dealing with. AARP is also not transparent with their seniors about the chance that they could be denied the healthcare that they need should they choose the privatized model as opposed to the traditional model. AARP had a chance to call out problems with Medicare Advantage denying care to patients when CMS released a request for comments about the program at the beginning of August. By the way, what I'm about to read to you is now it's a tale as old as time. I feel like this is always the game. But in its resulting August 30th letter, AARP hardly touched on care denials, instead recommending modest increases in transparency on issues like racial equity and telehealth funding, while championing the expansion of the privatized insurance program. And look, there's a lot of money on the line for AARP because in 2021 alone, AARP earned $814 million in royalties for its healthcare work, according to a recently released financial statement review by The Lever, which of course does wonderful work. That figure is more than double what the organization collects in dues. So dues meant to represent the best interests of the elderly folks who pay the dues, or double the amount of money by selling them crappy privatized Medicare. We'll go with the privatized Medicare. It's disgusting.
And they don't really have to choose. I mean, even if this was widespread knowledge, they're not gonna lose all their members. They would lose a few people or whatever. And I think they're perfectly willing to make that gamble. It's like with so many stories, just this is the direction the financial incentives are pointing in. And so in theory, maybe Congress could do anything, except there's a lot of reasons to believe that they're not going to. Or in theory, maybe the membership should get more involved and try to steer the organization in a different direction, even if that's even possible.
Well, knowledge is power. So if you have elderly folks in your family who are paying dues to AARP, make sure they know about this and make sure that they're not led astray by enrolling in privatized Medicare that will not only defraud us, but very likely deny them the healthcare they need.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.